Hey everyone, welcome to First Tuesdays with Heart. It is Tuesday, March 3rd, 2026. First Tuesdays with Heart is sponsored by the Heart Peer Support Team in connection with the Resiliency and Justice Center in Las Vegas. Heart stands for Healing, Empowering, and Rebuilding Together. We're a peer support program for anyone impacted by any mass violence incident. Real quick, wanted to introduce you to our Heart team. Alice is a licensed professional counselor and certified professional coach. She's the co-director of Heart, and she's also the Route 91 and UNLV support group facilitator. Jackie is a licensed marriage and family therapist. She's the behavioral health program coordinator for the Resiliency and Justice Center. She's one of our original Heart coaches, and she also facilitates the Route 91 and Continuing the Conversation support groups. And I'm Jill Winter. I'm co-director of Heart. I'm a Route 91 survivor. I assist Alice with the UNLV support group and Jackie with the Continuing the Conversation with Heart support groups. So we always like to start out with a meme or something that kind of talks about what we are, the topic of the night. And we found this: self-compassion is essential, especially when we are grieving. So we are incredibly excited to have Dr. Alyssa Rheingold with us. Dr. Rheingold is a clinical psychologist, professor, and associate director at the National Crime Victims Research and Treatment Center at the Medical University of South Carolina. And if that's not enough, she also serves as the Director of Response, Recovery, and Resiliency Division of the National Mass Violence Center, where she's provided consultations to over 20 communities impacted by mass violence. Dr. Reingold is often one of the first to um, go to the location of an incident to help that community out. She's a co-author of the Grief Recovery with Individualized Evidence-Based Formulation Approach, which is a modular intervention grounded in established trauma and grief treatments designed to address the diverse mental health impacts of violence or sudden loss. For more than 25 years, she has been deeply honored to support individuals navigating profound grief and trauma. So, with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Reingold.
So I am going to here talking about it's a pretty meaty topic here of holding grief gently, a journey into kind of meaning and how do we create life with meaning and purpose after we experience trauma and loss. Hopefully we could probably spend a good several hours talking about this. So I'm just going to hit the high points and just a couple concepts for y'all to sort of chew on as we go into discussion. I usually like to just start with this quote. This is a quote by Helen Keller. Although the world is full of suffering, it is also full of the overcoming of it, right? So kind of getting at this idea that we as humans experience suffering in our lives, we experience pain, and at the same time, we can hold space for both that, as well as how do we overcome, how do we empower, how do we kind of live a full, fruitful life while we have also experienced that type of suffering. So I'm going to talk about going to touch upon three concepts as we talk about. The first one is kind of two concepts combined, but I'm going to talk about three concepts: experiential avoidance, kind of going hand in hand. We'll talk about what that means, and what we talks about experiential engagement, and that's sort of getting at the concepts of how do we hold grief gently. Then we're going to talk a little bit about just hope and kind of concepts of hope, and then meaning and purpose, and sort of this idea of, again, how do we hold grief lightly while at the same time how do we live life that is fulfilling, and that we can get a sense of meaning and purpose in the things that we do. So let's start off a little bit talking about experiential avoidance and kind of what that actually means. I'm not sure if you've heard of that concept, but experiential avoidance is the process of trying to avoid your own experiences, our own thoughts, our own feelings, our own memories, our own body sensations, even Even sometimes when we do that, it can end up causing some long-term difficulties. We as humans, however, are hardwired to avoid unpleasant things, right? So it is our natural inclination when something doesn't feel good or when we have unwanted thoughts is to avoid, to push them away. However, what we do know is a little bit of avoidance, a little bit of distraction can be okay, especially if we need to focus in the things that we do each day. However, the more we kind of engage in that experiential avoidance of avoiding all things, what we tend to do then is we can't just carve out only avoiding the unpleasant. We tend to then avoid all things in life. And then when we do that, we sort of start to not experience other things, the pleasant things, the joy. And so often after trauma and grief, we tend to lean into that experiential avoidance because it's so difficult to lean in sometimes to the struggles. We as humans experience pain in our lives. It's normal. It's actually important. It's universal. So we can't necessarily get rid of psychological pain, although we can sometimes try to take steps to push it away, if you will, right? Suffering is actually a little different from pain. They're two separate things. They're two different sort of states of being. Um, Pain is something that we kind of experience the raw things in our life, the trauma, the grief. Suffering is sort of additional on top of that. Suffering is sort of our sort of struggle sometimes with pain. So that we add on additional layers. Though suffering could be additional thoughts about my pain. It could be additional feelings um, on top of. So, for instance, if my pain perhaps is fear and anxiety, additional suffering might be my thoughts of I'm not worthy to feel joy, or they could be anger thoughts, could be or anger feelings, I should say, could be additional suffering on top of that pain. Um, and that suffering in itself can get in the way of living sort of a valued life. Sometimes, what do we do about that? So sometimes we can strip away some suffering and acknowledge and lean into the pain that we have because we have it. Um, and and that sometimes can quiet the waters a little bit. So suffering is sometimes that fight against the pain, that like pushing things away, or and by doing that, we can actually even sink in deeper, if that makes sense. Pain is inevitable. Suffering is sort of the result of sort of resisting, if you will. So what do we do about that? So one way we can kind of lean in to some of these concepts of how we cope and manage with the pain of trauma, the pain of grief, is what's called experiential engagement. It is allowing ourselves to hold that grief, hold that trauma lightly. For many people after trauma and grief, sometimes it is right there in our face, often almost like this, right? And it is our world, right? All we see is trauma and all we see is grief. And it is right there. And experiential engagement can allow us to not push it away, because sometimes we fight with it. We try to push it away. If only I could get rid of it, right? But experiential engagement allows us to be okay with it and hold it, but maybe hold it gently next to us. We're not getting rid of it. We're not throwing it out because it's there, but it's just there. And by allowing ourselves to hold it a little bit more gently, we then can engage with life differently. Okay. So, how do we do that? Usually I get asked, like, oh, that all sounds well and good, but like, what do we do? Right. So, what actually is an experiential engagement? Well, experiential engagement, there's some concepts that go hand in hand with that. Acceptance is one of those. Acceptance is sort of this direct moment to moment contact with events, with experience, and taking experiences for what it is and not what we think it should be or not what we want it to be, but for what it is. It's allowing us to encounter emotions like grief, sadness, anxiety, anger, and accept them for what they are. Not trying to change it, not trying to get rid of it, also not gripping onto it too tightly, too. Um, the more we can kind of accept all the things, we can also then allow ourselves to accept and appreciate other feelings like joy, even like peacefulness, that often sometimes even goes unacknowledged, but we actually might experience them. So acceptance is not resigning ourselves to what is happening. So it's not simply, it's not kind of like giving up or being helpless to it. It is just means acknowledging what is happening is happening. What I'm feeling is what I'm feeling. Um, it doesn't really tell us what to do. It really, though, by allowing ourselves to accept what is, it allows us sometimes to choose differently. As opposed to being reactive, if you will. And acceptance goes hand in hand with what's called willingness. Willingness is accepting what is together with responding to it in sort of an appropriate or an effective way, I should say. Um, so willingness is a skill. It's not a feeling. It is allowing ourselves to be open and willing to experience whatever's showing up, and making the choice to fully engage and experience it, which I know for hard emotions like trauma and grief, that can be a challenge, right? And it doesn't mean we just like, just, fully give ourselves completely. It's not, willingness is not approving even it, or it is not forgiveness. It's not resignation, not giving up, or necessarily even agreeing with what we are experiencing. But it's just allowing ourselves to be willing to have it, allowing ourselves to be willing to hold it, right? That's really what willingness is. Um, so, um, so when we allow ourselves to do that, then we can sometimes do differently with it. Um, so let me give you an example that has nothing to do with trauma and grief, just to kind of explain those concepts. So I'm going to give a personal example. I have two daughters, and they are now older, in college. But when they were little, there was one day that I wanted to take them, to kind of go on just to have a nice family day. I'd been working a lot, and me and my husband took our two daughters to a county park, and we were going to go bike riding around the park. We loaded the two bikes up in the truck. We went to the county park. We get there, we unloaded the bikes, and in my mind, we're going to have a good day. This is going to be good, right? And when we got on the bikes, immediately my older daughter was like, I'm hot, it's hot, it's buggy, and I don't want to be here, and like whining. And my younger daughter was like, I'm hungry, can I get ice cream? And my husband was getting annoyed because, like, they were being whiny. And I'm just like, my initial reaction was like, everyone just ride your bikes, we're having fun, like real not accepting the situation for what it is. I had in my mind what I think it should be. And in my mind, this should be fun and this is going to be family time. And we're all going to just, be quiet and ride our bikes. Now, if I kept to that, if I didn't accept the situation for what it was, right, probably what would have happened is my kids would have whined more. I would have gotten more frustrated. My husband would have got more frustrated, and we would have loaded the bikes in the car and just left. Like, that's probably where it was heading. But I had to take pause and take a deep breath and kind of say, okay, this is where we're at. What the kids, they're whining, they're not enjoying themselves. This is what is my goal at the end of the day? What is it, my intention? What do I want this day to be about? Just to be with family. That is it, right? And so by allowing myself to be accepting of what the experience is for what it was and being willing to do that, then it created some wiggle room for me to make different choices. So then we were able to say, okay, maybe let's not ride bikes. There was a climbing wall at the county park. It was new. It was in the shade. My older daughter was, in the shade. They had a snack bar for my younger one. We're doing something different. So by allowing ourselves to accept what it was and be willing to, then I was able to do something a little bit different. It's a very kind of example. It's not, not trauma, not grief, but just kind of gets at the point of just looking at all of our experiences and not putting shoulds to them, what it should be or how I should feel or how this should go, but just accepting it for what it is. And we can do something different when we do that. Another reason why we should have willingness is because if you aren't willing to have it, you will, right? So I don't know if any of you kind of experienced that struggle of like, I don't want to feel this way. I need it. I should feel this. I should think this, right? The more we do those shoulds, right, the more we have it. And so that's another reason for kind of that willingness. Another kind of example I like to give is sort of just this idea that we're just on the other end of a tug of a war. So imagine on the end of this rope is sort of this monster, right? Between you and the monster is a bottomless pit. So you're sort of trying to tug of war to win, right? Um, and that and that monster could be feelings of doubt, it could be fear, it could be thoughts of unworthiness, whatever it may be for you, whatever your monster is, you're tugging of warring with it. You're trying to fight with it, right? And sometimes acceptance and willingness is not, sometimes people come to me in therapy, be like, help me get rid of this, help me struggle more. And I say, maybe we drop the rope. Maybe that's what if we let go of the struggle to control this emotions and thoughts or situations? What if we drop the rope? What would that be like? That could be scary to think about that, but what would that mean if we did? Um, and so that's a little bit about, we could spend a lot of time talking about experiential engagement, but I just wanted to plant the seeds of that's kind of what I mean when I kind of say holding grief lightly or holding trauma lightly of crap. We create space for it. We don't struggle with it. We drop the rope. All right. So that's concept number one, experiential engagement. So I'm going to talk just very briefly about hope, how we then shift. So what do we do with that, right? How do we drop the rope, and then what do we do with that? And often hope actually in the research has been shown to be really, really an important factor in it when people are coping with grief and trauma. Hope uh, isn't this a quote by Tama Bryan. Hope isn't a denial of what is, but a belief that the current situation is not all that it can be. That you can recognize something's wrong, but also that it's not the end of the story. Hope is actually action oriented. It can, and some people might say even hope is a skill itself that can be learned and can be practiced. It is not like toxic positivity. So it's not like, it's great, right? That is not what hope is. It's acknowledging distress, but also looking for opportunities for joy. And then when we do that, that's actually even an act of resistance to the things that are going on around us. So how do we do that? Well, there are lots of different ways to cultivate hope, and maybe when I'm done presenting, we can have a conversation of what that looks like for you, how you cultivate hope in your life. But there's lots of opportunities, even if it's just micro joys or glimmers, right? Those are those small joy moments. Can we capture those? Can we acknowledge those? Moments of gratitude, spirituality, engaging for some people, leaning into spirituality is ways they can cultivate hope. Um, Practicing flexibility in how we look at things, how we look at ourselves, how we look at the world can cultivate some hope. And connection and community fosters hope. So being together here this evening is leaning in and practicing hope in some way. And you can even go far things like so far as things like acts of kindness are other ways to be intentionally leaning into connection with people, with community, and see what that does for you. Uh, so talked about experiential avoidance and engagement, about hope, and now I want to lean into talking a little bit about meaning and meaning making and what that looks like, especially after we experience trauma and grief. This is a quote: "The meaning of life is to live a meaningful life." That's sort of one concept around thinking about what do we mean by live a meaningful life. Um, and so sometimes after trauma and grief, what is important to us changes or is shattered in some way, right? And so sometimes really taking pause and reflecting, okay, what is important to me now? What matters? What are my values? What gives me meaning? What gives me purpose? Because that could be very different now from what it was before the experiences of mass violence. And before the experience of if you have a loved one that was killed, right, and not having them there with you, and so sometimes that can shatter. I have often will work with people and I say, I don't know what gives me meaning and purpose. And so taking time to really think about that. We often don't like wake up and be like, what is the meaning and purpose? So clarifying that can be helpful. Different times in your life, you might need to re-clarify. So what is important to me now might be different from what was important to me 5 years ago, what might be more important to me 10 years ago. And you know what? In 10 years from now, it's going to look different. So re-clarifying for yourself what is important, what are your values, um, and and what gives you meaning and purpose. And if you've experienced loss of a loved one, I would say, are there ways to get meaning and purpose feeling connected with them, even though they're not physically here anymore? And how do you engage? How do you build that into what gives you meaning and purpose? Keep an eye on time, so just a few more slides. So meaning and purpose, you can use the words meaning or purpose. You could use values, sort of what's important to you. Values, I do want to say, are, like, how do you want to spend your time? What's important in your life? They are different from goals. So as a society, we're very goal driven, like goals, right? Goals are fine, and we need goals to do things, but they're different from values. Goals we check off, values we strive for. And when we live our life towards the things we strive for, that everything that we do is that much more enriched, because it's not about achieving something. It's about living towards something. So we can think about values like a compass. Like, what is the direction? Where do we want to guide our grief on our journey? And goals are sort of those steps along the way. So sometimes it can be helpful to figure out, like, what does your compass look like? Where do you want to go? So values are self-chosen qualities of purposeful action. They can be, like I said, connected to your loved one. If you have a loved one that was killed, they're not goals, they're not feelings. So they're not internal states. They're not how people treat us. They're not outcomes. They're really they're intentions. So, give you an example. I could value being a present mother for my two daughters. Right? I value that. Right? It doesn't mean check, I've done it. Right? But I'm always working towards striving that. And then from there, we can choose intentional actions linked towards those values. Then I can choose, what do I want to do towards that? You can you can tie your values. If you have a loved one that was killed, you can tie those to that person too. So for instance, I have someone that I was working with whose daughter was killed. I'm sorry, her sister was killed. And her sister was very health conscious. And so she decided that she wanted to focus her values on her health in honor of her sister. And so she bought a water bottle that was purple, her sister's favorite color. And every day when she drinks her water towards her own value of being healthy, she's doing that in honor of her sister. So you can connect your values and meaning in life in honor of your loved one. So just kind of some food for that, how you can bring that together. They're not separate necessarily. So I want to take just a few minutes for you to think about for yourself, if you have a piece of paper, just write down, or maybe on your phone, you can type it in your phone, like what is the big for you? What is important? What gives you your life meaning? What matters most to you? And I just want you to just take pause for just a few minutes to reflect on that for yourself. Um, and we'll talk in just a minute, but just take pause individually. While you're doing that, sure, can't, not everyone, if sometimes people need to chew on that a bit, so chew on that. But while you're doing that, the next step after that would be to sort of create a roadmap. Identify what are the actions that you want to do that you're going to commit um, towards your values, the big, the impact, the meaning, whatever words fit for you. Like I said, an example of, is it, what is your purple water bottle? What are some of those very specific concrete things you're going to do that's going to help you commit towards your values? I will also have to say that you can expect that there's going to be barriers and struggles, right? So barriers can be internal thoughts and feelings. So our own maybe anxiety, our own thoughts, our own, they can get in the way and prevent you from moving forward towards your values. And so notice that. Sometimes setting too many goals, excessive goals can get in the way. So self-compassion, as Jill started with, right? Having some self-compassion on where you're at, that's okay too. Avoiding discomfort. Sometimes what we value can make us feel uncomfortable to do things. And so our own discomfort can get in the way. And then sometimes a barrier is just our remoteness from our values. We say it, and then, I don't know, a week later, we forget about them. So in that regard, I encourage you to write things down. I'd actually encourage you to kind of write it on a bigger piece of paper, these sticky notes, and just put it somewhere on the mirror in your bathroom or somewhere where you can see the words, see your values. So then it kind of reminds you. I guess put it on your home screen on your phone too. So kind of putting these concepts together of, experiential engagement and meaning and value, it's kind of like you're driving a bus and we're acknowledging and welcoming all the emotions, all the experiences, all the thoughts on our bus. We're not pushing them off. We're not trying to get rid of them. But we're welcoming them on board, telling them to get in the back of the bus. Let's go. And we're driving our bus towards what gives us meaning and purpose in life. So it's a combination. And so that visual image, that metaphor can maybe be helpful for you to think about, okay, where do you get stuck? Do you turn to your passengers? Do you turn your bus? Do you drive your bus in a ditch? Do you drive it in circles? Well, then you might need to do a little bit of work of welcoming, acknowledging, and then at the same time, just redirect your attention to where you want to drive. So encourage you to take pause and kind of identify your values, identify what gets in the way of your meaningful life, and then what you're going to do to choose to honor your values. What are you going to do to honor what gives you meaning and purpose? So I do want to highlight two resources. Since I am from the National Mass Violence Center, I'm going to highlight a couple of our resources just for you to be aware of. We do have a self-help app called Transcend NMVC. It's free for anybody impacted by mass violence. You can download it on, um, on an iPhone and on Google, and it just has a lot of different kind of skills and ways and strategies to help yourself manage. And then we also have a virtual resiliency center, which has a lot of information just about coping and services and resources. It's called massviolence.help. So just wanted to share those two resources. I usually like to end on this image anytime I talk about mass violence or anytime I talk about trauma and grief, especially as we talk about the concepts of hope. So this image, I live in Charleston, South Carolina. Probably should have started with that. And I was part of the response to the Mother Emanuel AME church shooting in 2015 that occurred at Mother Emanuel. And I was part of that recovery efforts. This picture I took, this picture is a photo of Mother Emanuel. This is 1 year to the day of Bible study of that shooting. We just had Bible study in church. Everybody left church, and myself and some other providers were in the parking lot talking about the upcoming commemoration and activities, and a rainbow appeared over the church. And for me, rainbows are a sign of hope. I look for those. Those are one of my glimmers, and so this picture for me just signifies hope. At the 5 year commemoration time period, there was a double rainbow over the church. I didn't capture that photo, but anyways, I usually like to share that image of hope that they have.
I
Yeah,
absolutely
for me.
love that you caught the rainbow. And I think that is such a great reminder that there is hope. And I know sometimes it's really hard to see that, especially after going through a mass violence incident. But just the fact that you got that is amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. We were all crying when it happens, don't you? We're
I'm
all hugging
sure.
and crying.
I'm sure. I'm sure it's what that's a big glimmer for definitely.
Yes.
So, does anybody have any questions for Dr. Reingold? Any comments?
No, I threw out a lot of meaty concepts there.
I absolutely love the Strug of War monster.
Hmm.
It's it's so true, and I know for me, trauma going through route brought a lot of self-doubt, and I like the vision of dropping that rope of struggling with it because it's not doing me any good.
Yeah, yeah. And you can even, I've encouraged folks to buy a little piece of rope, and like have that as like a visual image. So if like, oh, I got to drop the rope, like literally, I'm gonna throw that down on my desk. Uh,
It's a really good idea. That's a really good idea.
I also loved the discussion of values. I've often said that the more in alignment our values and behavior are, the more at peace we are. That that's just something that, and going through trauma or grief and loss, it can put you in a position of clarifying your values. They become, to me, more clear. They just become like, this is what's important to me, and
mhm.
let me align my behavior with that. And you can definitely find peace. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Jackie, I noticed that a lot for myself. You know, Alyssa mentioned our perspective changing after going through trauma, and my perspective changed so much, but it's now more in line with my values too.
Mm.
And, it's been almost 8.5 years for me, and that has changed over time, as was also mentioned, but it just, and, you mentioned the importance of gratitude, and that's something that I moved to Tennessee a little over 5 years ago, and I decided I was going to really focus on that. And it has changed me so much in my healing.
Mm.
I think that's really important. We have somebody mentioned setting social boundaries has been my struggle in meeting my values. I feel pressured sometimes when they don't align, especially with work and family.
Yeah, I absolutely agree that setting right that those can be barriers that get in the way. Other people's, goals and other people's demands, right, can get in the way. And how do we gently create those boundaries so that way we can continue to work on our own values. And one of our values might be to maintain relationships with other people. Like how do we do that so it's not a very like, I got my own things I got to do, right? Um, so we might have multiple values struggling right at the same plate in the same space too. How do we maintain relationships and be assertive and kind of create some boundaries to be able to do some to be able to take care of yourself or to work towards your values. So I think that's a very legit struggle. I don't know if folks in here what they do, how they manage that.
I think sometimes it's hard because the people around us oftentimes don't understand how we're feeling and that we are grieving. A lot of people don't think of going through trauma as grief. And
Mhm.
I hate to say it, but I don't know that I thought of that before route. Now I know better, but it's trying to align your values with people who don't understand how you're feeling can be challenging.
Mhm. Yeah.
I, I think it can be about prioritizing, which, like Jill said, can shift. So we might prioritize maintaining connections with others, but I prioritize my peace and my boundaries. That's a higher one. Does that make sense? Like there can be a order which can shift, but if I'm trying to protect my sort of one of my values, or two of them are protecting my peace, protecting my health, and so if somebody, one of my connections is, making that harder, I want to make sure that those are the top ones, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Mm.
And prioritizing and protecting our peace is incredibly important after what we've been through too. But another comment, once I've been through my most recent traumatic experience, I just started putting my foot down on my boundaries, protecting me for once. And I think, I know several of you, and I know a lot of us have, prior to our incident, we were those that put other people first, and it's learning to put ourselves first and prioritizing, like Jackie said, prioritizing ourselves.
Mhm.
Mm.
So I'm just kind of curious, what are ways people here kind of, foster that skill of hope? How do you practice hope? Just curious what people do here to do that. I know, Jill, you mentioned gratitude for you.
Gratitude and glimmers.
Yeah.
I think, I know a lot of you have heard us mention this, but looking for those little things in life that bring a smile to our face instead of looking for the one big thing. I
Hmm.
noticed today I've have several of my tulips are popping up out of the ground. And it's just like, oh, that means it's warming up. It's those little things that even on our worst day, we can find those little things in life that bring us hope. Music and singing. Yeah, that's another big one.
Yeah, music's so important because you can find out like if you find yourself depressed when there's no reason to be, um, you can kind of look and see, okay, what's my playlist been? And it could be that you've been listening to songs that are supposed to be that are written to evoke the emotion of sadness. And maybe that's not what you need right now. Maybe you need a happy dance tune. So music and singing is such a great way to cultivate hope.
Absolutely. I try, in parentheses, to make sure I take time to look at how far I've come. I look at everything I've accomplished, and that's huge. I think, you know, looking back at where we were on the day of our incident compared to where we are now, we're always going to be healing, but we've taken so many strides forward, and that's a wonderful reminder. I think it's important not to expect people to understand how we feel and make it okay to reflect on what we value and nurture. Yeah, absolutely. And
So
going into nature, that's that can be huge and grounding too. Mood mixtape. Oh, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. Anyone else have anything they want to add to this?
And I just would like to comment on the comment of it's important not to expect people to understand how we feel. Like that gets at a little bit about that acceptance, right? Of accepting that it, people aren't going to understand. And is that okay? Instead of fighting this, but they should, they should understand. They should respond a certain way. Maybe they won't. And is that okay? And what do we do with that? Can we accept that that might happen? Doesn't mean that we don't continue to share our feelings and tell people what we need, right? But what would that be like if we, didn't expect that? So thank you for sharing that comment.
Yeah. I try to remember, especially with mass violence, that I'm so glad that most people don't know how we feel. I mean, it would be easier if they did, but I don't want them to go through what we've been through. So I do have to accept that they're not going to understand. And that's part of why this community is so important. We can lean on each other when others around us don't understand how we feel. And Jackie added pets. And I don't know if you guys notice, and this happens almost every first Tuesday, but I have two that like to make Zoom appearances, so I'm there with pets. Oh, and Jackie got a new kitty that she's showing. Neuro art. And that's thank you, Jen. That's a really good segue. Twice a month, the Resiliency Center offers a meditative art program that we do by Zoom. And it's really nice and grounding. We'd
And
invite
Jill
everyone to.
facilitates peer led. Yay, yay. She's amazing.
Thank you. Anything else?
I was looking at my notes and I appreciate Dr. Rheingold that you mentioned that experiential avoidance can be helpful in small doses. And and I think that's important to give people to give ourselves permission. It's okay for me to avoid this right now. I just don't want to avoid everything in my life because then I'm not going to be able to enjoy the good things as well. But the small things, it's okay. It's a like when we start to feel very flat with our emotions, it's a kind of a sign like, uh-oh, maybe I've been avoiding too much. So I appreciated that. And then that experiential engagement. And when you had your hand over your face, I was thinking how overwhelming grief is when the loss first happens. and how it like is all encompassing. And so like that was your hand in front of your face. And then part of the struggle I know for myself was I didn't want to move that to the side because I felt like it was dishonoring to the person I lost.
Yeah.
And so, part of me said I needed to be upset and worked up or whatever feelings I was having at the time. And but the idea of I'm not letting go of it, I'm just bringing it to the side so I can see more clearly and then put it in a place of like I can't hold anything with my hands like this, right? So, but putting it like that, I thought that was just a really beautiful example of holding my grief or holding our grief and the importance of it, but it doesn't have to be right in front of my face the whole time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So thank you for those.
Yeah. No, I think people often, yeah, either try to push it away. They're spending a lot of energy trying to push it away because they don't
Hmm.
want it there, right? Or, right, they spend a lot of energy keeping it there.
Right.
For all the reasons you share, right? Very kind of very common thoughts around what that means and what would that
Hmm.
mean if I didn't have it there, right? But yeah, so we're not getting rid of it, but maybe we're just you having a different relationship with it. And then what does that do? It allows us to potentially, you know, it's not a either or, it's an and. How do I
Yeah.
have and create space for this and still live a full, meaningful life?
Yeah. Yeah. That's really beautiful. Thank you for sharing that with us.
We want to remind you that we have our Continuing the Conversation with Heart support group. It's the third Tuesday of each month at 4 o'clock Pacific, 7 o'clock Eastern, and the fourth Thursday of each month at 6 o'clock Pacific, 9 o'clock Eastern. That is facilitated both by Jackie and myself. And we oftentimes start by talking about what the topic of the month was, but anything that you guys want to discuss is open. We are there to support you, and it's nice to have others around who understand and can support as well. Want to make sure you guys know that the On-Site Foundation offers a program called Triumph Over Tragedy. It is for people for mass shooting survivors. They are taking applications right now. The dates are June 18th through the 24th at their campus in Ramona, California, which is just outside of San Diego. The only out-of-pocket for us survivors is a $300 registration fee and transportation to the San Diego airport, or if you live close by, driving to the campus. The one caveat is you must be at least 1 year post-incident. I've now gone through it twice. I did the very first one they did in March of 20, so almost 6 years ago. And then I did the most recent one in August. And I can truly tell you that 6 days is life-changing. It's hard to explain that, how 6 days can make such a difference. But I know there are several people on here who have also participated and they think the same. So I would highly encourage you guys to go ahead and apply if these dates work for you. Next month, we are welcoming back Dr. Alexis Kennedy, and she will be discussing sleep solutions. And we know how important sleep is when it comes to mass violence and trauma. Unfortunately, it's something that a lot of us struggle with, and she's got some great ideas to share with us. So we always like to share some additional support. If you'd like to be paired with one of our Heart Peer mentors, you can go to the resiliencyandjustice.org/heart and click on request Heart Peer support. Our trained mentors have been impacted by mass violence as well and are there to support you one-on-one. The Disaster Distress Helpline was created for people impacted by natural and man-made disasters. They have a 24/7 crisis support line. It's even if you wake up in the middle of the night with ruminating thoughts, you can't go back to sleep, you can go ahead and call or text them, and they have somebody that can help support you. Dr. Rheingold mentioned the Virtual Resiliency Center and the Transcend NMVC app. We highly recommend those. The Transcend NMVC app was created by survivors for survivors. There's a lot of incredible information both on the app and the Virtual Resiliency Center, as well as their website. It's always important to remember the 988 number. And then we have our First Tuesdays with Heart Facebook page where we post links to the videos of the First Tuesdays. There's all sorts of inspirational posts that are being made by members. So we'd encourage you to join that if you're not part of it. And then we do have a cooking for post-traumatic growth page. We found that cooking can be very grounding and healing. So we created a page where people can share recipes, ask questions, and even things like gardening, which can be very grounding. So if you're not part of that, we'd welcome you to join that. And we just want to thank everybody for, I'm sorry. Forgot about integrative services. So our integrative services through the Resiliency and Justice Center are open to anybody impacted by any mass violence incident. This includes family members who may not have been there, but they were also impacted too. We know that there is that trickle down effect for us. All these programs are free. The only one that is not virtual is the equine therapy demonstration. If you're going to be in the Vegas area, they're doing a demonstration. I would highly encourage you to attend. But we have our Heart Peer Support Program. We have First Tuesdays with Heart, continuing the conversation with Heart, our support groups. There's a weekly meditation and mindfulness program. And they also do a little bit of a longer once a month program. We have a Saturday trauma recovery yoga program, and we were talking about the meditative art program, which we do some, it kind of is based on neurographic art and some Zentangle on top of it. You do not have to be an artist. I struggle with drawing a stick figure, and I've really thoroughly enjoyed doing this because it quiets the ping pong balls in my mind, which is rare to have happen. So for any information or to register, please go to the resiliencyanjustice.org/calendar. And now we want to thank everybody for joining us. We really appreciate your time, um, and your fact that you're taking care of yourself. So please feel free to reach out to us at heartpure91@gmail.com or through the Facebook group. And we hope to see everybody in 2 weeks for the support group and then next month for our First Tuesdays. Have a great night, everyone.